is Damien, the Talk-Friendly Atheist Dad, and host of the Talk-Friendly Atheist Dad podcast. And this is part 9 of An Atheist Reads, The People of the Abyss by Jack London.
So far from lies and hypocrisy, returns to energy, and silence becomes breathe. Don't ask me the reason why. Just say, I only dream in black and white. Future's nothingness, but I can choose another end. Opening my eyes, and you beginning in my life. Without emptiness to feel, I am sure of myself. No mercy until the end.
Alright, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time of day it is, whenever you're listening to this, I hope you're doing well. And yeah, I thought I'd have a read of this book again. Always good to go have a bit of a walk down memory lane in terms of history, even though it is only 120 years ago. I still think there's some important lessons to be learned. So this is, I forget what chapter this was. This was chapter 9. Chapter 9, The Spike. Now, part 8, I got about 2/3 of the way through that particular chapter. It's a very long chapter. So what it is, I might read the previous page just before to get some refresh your memories. And by the way, the music in the background is from Victim of Illusion. Head over to victimofillusion.bandcamp.com and check out some awesome prog rock. Those guys, love those guys. So anyway, so the whole thing about the People of the Abyss is that an American journalist goes undercover in London to see how the poorer people of London, the eastern side of London in particularly, live. And yeah, reading through, so this is actually, I think, the third time I've read through the book, and yeah, it's actually quite, compared to our modern day society with our modern conveniences and labour laws and protections and all that kind of stuff, England back in the early 1900s was pretty shocking. So at this part of the book, Jack London, who is the author, he is currently in line for what's called the Spike. The Spike is a slang name for a workhouse, and the workhouse is basically where they take in a certain number of homeless people for basically a day's worth of labour in return for a couple of nights of sleep and some meals. But that day's labour that you do is pretty intense. So yeah, just give you a bit of background. So anyway. Actually, I probably, yes, so the music, so I will, sorry, I'm a little bit confused about something. So anyway, so I'll start, okay, I don't know what page I'm on, but yeah, so chapter 9, The Spike, and I'll start where I start, and if you can keep up, feel free to keep up. Otherwise, 3, 2, 1 with a click. In fact, I found that I had made a mistake. I had eaten a hearty dinner 5 hours before, and to have done justice to the fare before me, I should have fasted for a couple of days. The pannikin contained skilly, 3/4 of a pint, a mixture of Indian corn and hot water. The men were dipping their bread into heaps of salt scattered over the dirty tables. I attempted the same, but the bread seemed to stick in my mouth, and I remembered the words of the carpenter, "You need a pint of water to eat the bread nicely." I went over into a dark corner where I had observed other men going and found the water. Then I returned and attacked the skilly. It was coarse of texture, unseasoned, gross, and bitter. This bitterness, which lingered persistently in the mouth after the skilly had passed on, I found especially repulsive. I struggled manfully, but was mastered by my qualms, and half a dozen mouthfuls of skilly and bread was the measure of my success. The man beside me ate his own share, and mine to boot, scraped the pannikins, and looked hungrily for more. I met a townie, and he stood me too good a dinner, I explained. And I haven't had a bite since yesterday morning, he replied. How about tobacco? I asked. Will the bloke bother with a fellow now? Oh no, he answered me, no bloomin' fear. This is the easiest spike going. You ought to see some of them. Search it to the skin. The pannikins scraped clean. Conversation began to spring up. This superintendent here is always writing to the papers about us mugs, said the man on the other side of me. What does he say? I asked. Oh, he says we're no good. A lot of blackguards and scoundrels as won't work. Tells the old tricks I've been hearing for 20 years and which I never seen a mug ever do. Last thing of I see, he was telling our mug get out of the spike with a crust in his pocket. And when he sees a nice old gentleman coming along the street, he chucks the crust into the drain and borrows the old gent's stick to poke it out. And the old gent gives him a tanner. A roar of applause greeted the time-honoured yarn, and from somewhere over in the deeper darkness came another voice, orating angrily. Talk of the country being good for Tommy, food. I'd like to see it. I just come up from Dover, and bless the little Tommy I got. They won't give you a drink of water, they won't, much less Tommy. There's mugs never go out of Kent, spoke a second voice. They live bloomin' fat all along. I come through Kent, went on the first voice, still more angry, and God blimey if I see any Tommy. And I always notices as the blokes as talks about how much they can get when they're in the spike can eat my share of skilly as well as their bleeding own. There's chaps in London, said a man across the table from me, that get all the Tommy they want and never think of going to the country. Stay in London the year round. Nor do they think of looking for a kip, place to sleep in, till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. A general chorus verified this statement. So yeah, what we've what we can gain from this particular part of the chapter is, so basically they're having their meal just before they're going for rest or for work. I forget what part of the book this is. And so basically the man, he gets his, now I forgot exactly what skill he was. Let me just see if I can, and I've got my son in the background. Okay, so skilly is a thin porridge or soup, usually oatmeal and water flavoured with meat. That sounds enticing, but so he's saying that once he tried the porridge, and it was just the bitter taste in it. And so the guy next to him ate his own share plus Jack's as well. And so in order to get out of not having to eat it, he said that he met a townsperson, we'll call it townie, and he bought him a dinner, which means took me too good a dinner. And then where he says, this is the easiest spike going, you ought to see some of them searched to the skin. Where it says, so how about tobacco? Will bloke bother with a fellow now? So he's basically asking for tobacco, and as he's saying that in some of the other spikes. So around London were all these workhouses. Basically, most suburbs and most districts had a workhouse that people looking for work or a place to sleep could go to, and and some of them they search to the skin to make sure you're not bringing anything in, and they're saying that this particular workhouse is actually pretty good. So anyway, then the conversation basically goes that, Dover is another town in England, so is Kent, and it's saying that in Dover and Kent, there's some people who take more than their fair share of food, and then saying in London, there are people in London who just don't bother going out because they get more than enough, all that kind of stuff. So I'll continue the reading. So 3, 2, 1. "But they're bloomin' clever, them chaps," said an admiring voice. "Course they are," said another voice. "But it's not the likes of me and you can do it. You got to be born to it, I say. Them chaps have been opening cabs and selling papers since the day they was born, and their fathers and mothers before 'em. It's all in the training, I say, and the likes of me and you would starve at it." This also was verified by the general chorus, and likewise the statement that there were mugs as lives the 12-month round in the spike and never get a blessed bit of Tommy other than spike, skilly and bread. "I once got half a crown in the Stratford spike," said a new voice. Silence fell on the instant, and all listened to the wonderful tale. "There was 3 of us breaking stones, wintertime, and the cold was cruel. The other 2 said they'd be blessed if they do it, and they didn't. And I kept wearing into mine to warm up, And then the Guardians come, and the other chaps got run in for 14 days. And the Guardians, when they see what I've been doing, gives me a tanner each, 5 of them, and turns me up." So basically, just to clarify what that means is, so a crown is a relatively decent amount of money. This guy was breaking stones, which is pretty tough work. And then so two of them got they basically skipped out on their work, and where it says they got turned in for 14 days, it basically means they got sent to jail for 14 days. And I can't help but think if the free labour, if the market labour, is this tough, I can only imagine how bad the prison is. And so then, because this guy did all the work by himself, he actually got money, which is like, so a tanner. Just trying to think what a tanner. Let me just let me just see if I can. Okay, what is tanner in all money? Okay, so a 6pence. Okay, which is so 6pence, also known as a tanner or half a shilling. So yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, so the guy got money, actual money. This is So anyway, let me continue. Where was I? "The majority of these men, nay, all of them, I found, do not like the spike, and only come when driven in. After the rest up, they are good for 2 or 3 days and nights on the streets, when they are driven in again for another rest. Of course, this continuous hardship quickly breaks their constitutions, and they realise it, though only in a vague way, while it is so much the common run of things that they do not worry about it. On the DOS, they call vagabondage here, which corresponds to on the road in the United States. The agreement is that kipping, or dossing, or sleeping is the hardest problem they have to face, harder even than that of food. The inclement weather and the harsh laws are mainly responsible for this, while the men themselves ascribe their homelessness to foreign immigration, especially of Polish and Russian Jews, who take their places at lower wages and establish the sweating system. By 7 o'clock, we were called away to bathe and go to bed. We stripped our clothes, wrapping them up in our coats and buckling our belts about them, and deposited them in a heaped rack and on the floor. A beautiful scheme for the spread of vermin. Then, 2 by 2, we entered the bathroom. There were 2 ordinary tubs. And this I know, The two men preceding had washed in that water. We washed in the same water, and it was not changed for the two men that followed us. Of this I know, but I am also certain that the 22 of us washed in that same water. I did no more than make a show of splashing some of this dubious liquid at myself, while I hastily brushed it off with a towel wet from the bodies of other men. My equanimity was not restored by seeing the back of one poor wretch a mass of blood from attacks of vermin and retaliatory scratching. A shirt was handed me, which I could not help but wonder how many other men had worn, and with a couple of blankets under my arm I trudged off to the sleeping apartment. This was a long, narrow room, traversed by two low iron rails. Between these rails were stretched, not hammocks, but pieces of canvas, 6 feet long and less than 2 feet wide. These were the beds, and they were 6 inches apart and about 8 inches above the floor. The chief difficulty was that the head was somewhat higher than the feet, which caused the body constantly to slip down. Being slung to the same rails, when one man moved, no matter how slightly, the rest was set rocking, and whenever I dozed, somebody was sure to struggle back to the position from which he had slipped and arouse me again. Alright, so they've had their, I don't know if you can call it food, but yes, they've had their food. Just make sure there's no comments. That's cool. Yeah, so whether you could call it food is another thing, but yeah. So now in another copy of the book I've got, she's actually got pictures, some very grainy black and white pictures in this, and yeah, it's basically like, I suppose you could call it hammocks for want of a more modern term. But it's just basically canvas stretched between two rails, and yeah, heaven help you if you're anything above 6 foot, which somehow I am. And yeah, so you got to somehow get to sleep in this crummy shirt that they give you, and blankets and all this kind of stuff. And now one thing I did also want to pick up was this sentence here. While the men ascribe their homelessness to foreign immigration, especially of Polish and Russian Jews, who take their places at lower wages and establish a sweating system. Now, how correct that is, I don't know for sure, but I suppose, post-industrial revolution and pre-working rights, and especially what we have now, this is one reason why the communists and the unionists were so fervent about what they, protecting their turf, was that, unfortunately, around this time, there wasn't much in terms of labour regulation, and so, if you had an immigrant who would come in and do the same job for cheaper and with a lot less complaints, then, it's if you're a captain of industry, as they might call it, you want the job done for the lowest price possible, and so, you take the guy who will work for, half the price. He'll work twice as long for half the price, and and this is kind of what outsourcing does now. For example, your contact centres, and all that kind of stuff. You outsource to people who will, do it for a third of the price of what a local person will, and hopefully things don't muck up. So now, where was I? So, all right, I'll put the music back on in 3, 2, 1. Many hours had passed before I wanted to sleep. It was only 7 in the evening, and the voices of children in shrill outcry playing in the street continued till nearly midnight. The smell was frightful and sickening, while my imagination broke loose, and my skin crept and crawled till I was nearly frantic. Grunting, groaning, and snoring arose like the sounds emitted by some sea monster, and several times, afflicted by nightmare, one or another, by his shrieks and yells, aroused a lot of us. Toward morning, I was awakened by a rat or some similar animal on my breast. In the quick transition from sleep to waking, before I was completely myself, I raised a shout to wake the dead. At any rate, I woke the living, and they cursed me roundly for my lack of manners. But morning came, with a 6 o'clock breakfast of bread and skilly, which I gave away, and we were told off to our various tasks. Some were set to scrubbing and cleaning, others to picking oakum, and 8 of us were convoyed across the street to the Whitechapel Infirmary, where we were set at scavenger work. This was the method by which we paid for our skilly and canvas, and I, for one, know that I paid in full many times over. Alright, so let's quickly pause there, and yes, this is another thing as well, is that these aren't hotels. These aren't, I wouldn't even call them hostels. You know, all these are just places where people sleep. There's no guarantee of cleanliness, there's no guarantee of being free from vermin. And remember, this is, London isn't the cleanest, especially industrial London, isn't the cleanest place in the world. So, yeah, being woken up by a rat on your chest, I would probably screech very loudly as well. Now, just a couple of terms here. Now, what was it? Oakum. Now, I did. Oakum was. Just trying to think exactly what oakum was. Okay. So oakum picking. What was it? Alright, so oakum, just try to find exactly what oakum is. It's basically like a fibre. Here we go. Okay, so oakum is a preparation of tarred fibre used to seal gaps. Its main traditional applications were in shipbuilding for caulking or packing the joints of timbers in wooden vessels. Just trying to think. So, just trying to think. Yeah, so it's basically a fibre that you pick from old ropes. Is what I can gather, and so yeah, if you apparently it's pretty hard on the fingers. And yeah, so oakum picking was the teasing out of fibres from old ropes, and was very hard on the fingers. The loose fibres were often sold to shipbuilders for mixing with tar to seal the lining of wooden craft. They could also be used to make matting or bandaging. And then why did people pick oakum? So I was reading from a website here. Picking oakum was used as a punishment in prison and in workhouses as a way of able-bodied inmates earning their board and lodging. Prisoners serving hard labour would cut the rope in 2-foot lengths and then strike it with a heavy mallet to remove the very hard tar in which it was coated. So there you go. That's you learn something new. And scavenger. I'm just trying to think of scavenger work. That could well be so scavenger work. Now, Whitechapel Infirmary, so that means it was a hospital or a medical facility, and yeah, it's probably getting. Actually, I really don't know what you'd scavenge from a hospital, whether it be food, whether it be supplies or materials or stuff like that. But then where he says, and I for one know that I paid in full many times over, is sort of an indication of how hard the work was. Can you sit down? Touch. Thank you. Anyway, I will go back to the book. 3, 2, 1. Though we had most revolting tasks to perform, our allotment was considered the best, and the other men deemed themselves lucky in being chosen to perform it. "Don't touch it, mate. The nurse says it's deadly," warned my working partner, as I held open a sack into which he was emptying a garbage can. It came from the sick wards, and I told him that I purposed neither to touch it nor to allow it to touch me. Nevertheless, I had to carry the sack, and other sacks, down 5 flights of stairs, and empty them in a receptacle where the corruption was speedily sprinkled with strong disinfectant. Perhaps there is a wise mercy in all this. These men of the spike, the peg, and the street are encumbrances. They are of no good or use to anyone, nor to themselves. They clutter the earth with their presence, and are better out of the way. Broken by hardship, ill-fed, and worse nourished. They are always the first to be struck down by disease, as they are likewise the quickest to die. They feel themselves that the forces of society tend to hurl them out of existence. We were sprinkling disinfectant by the mortuary when the dead wagon drove up and 5 bodies were packed into it. The conversation turned to the white potion and blackjack, and I found they were all agreed that the poor person, man or woman, who in the infirmary gave too much trouble or was in a bad way was polished off. That is to say, the incurables and the obstreperous were given a dose of blackjack or the white potion and sent over the divide. It does not matter in the least whether this be actually so or not. The point is, they have the feeling that it is so, and they have created the language with which to express that feeling. Blackjack, white potion, polishing off. At 8 o'clock, we went down into a cellar under the infirmary where tea was brought to us and the hospital scraps. These were heaped high on a huge platter in an indescribable mess. Pieces of bread, chunks of grease and fat pork, the burnt skin from the outside of roasted joints, bones. In short, all the leavings from the fingers and mouths of the sick ones suffering from all manner of diseases. Into this mess the men plunged their hands, digging, pouring, turning over, examining, rejecting, and scrambling for. It wasn't pretty. Pigs couldn't have done worse. But the poor devils were hungry, and they ate ravenously of the swill. And when they could eat no more, they bundled what was left into their handkerchiefs and thrust it inside their shirts. Once, when I was here before, what I did find out there but a whole lot of pork ribs, said Ginger to me. By out there, he meant the place where the corruption was dumped and sprinkled with strong disinfectant. They was a prime lot, no end of meat on 'em, and I had 'em in my arms and I was out the gate and down the street and looking for something to give 'em to. Couldn't see a soul, and I was running around clean crazy, the bloke running after me thinking I was slinging my hook, running away. But just before he got me, I got an old woman and poked him into an apron. Oh charity, oh philanthropy, descend to the spike and take a lesson from Ginger. At the bottom of the abyss, he performed as purely an altruistic act as was ever performed outside the abyss. It was fine of Ginger, and if the old woman caught some contagion from the no end of meat on the pork ribs, it was still fine, though not so fine. But the most salient thing in this incident, it seems to me, is poor Ginger. Clean crazy at the sight of so much food going to waste. It is the rule of the casual ward that a man who enters must stay 2 nights in a day. But I had seen sufficient for my purpose, had paid for my skilly and canvas, and was preparing to run for it. Come on, let's sling it, I said to one of my mates, pointing toward the open gate through which the dead wagon had come. And get 14 days? No, get away. Oh, I come here for a rest, he said complacently, and another night's kip won't hurt me none. They were all of this opinion, so I was forced to sling it alone. You can't ever come back here for a doss, they warned me. No fear, said I, with an enthusiasm they could not comprehend. and dodging out the gate, I sped down the street. Straight to my room I hurried, changed my clothes, and less than an hour from my escape, in a Turkish bath, I was sweating out whatever germs and other things had penetrated my epidermis, and wishing that I could stand a temperature of 320 rather than 220. Alright, so that is the end of chapter 9. So, yeah, so let's just quickly go through what is described just on the previous page there. So, when the men by polish off is basically to hasten someone's death. Blackjack and white potion obviously refer to some sort of toxins or pathogens or some sort of a medicine or something that they would give someone who's not in a good way, and basically hasten their death. Is the now what the author is saying is that he doesn't know if this is true, that they would actually give someone in the infirmary something to hasten their death, but the fact that they think about it and they've got language for it means that they believe it is so anyway. Then it said at 8 o'clock we went down into a cellar under the infirmary where tea was brought to us and the hospital scraps. And again, so this is again, this isn't a hostel, this isn't a B&B, this is you get what's given to you, and it's not pretty, and it's this is I think probably the word is exploitation. In that you just we don't really care for you. We are legally obliged to feed you, but what we give you is, it doesn't matter what we give you, if you don't want it, don't have it, kind of thing. But then the story says here where so his friend Ginger basically he found a whole heap of pork ribs, and they had plenty of meat on them, and so Ginger grabbed them. He ran out the gate down the street just looking for someone to give them to, and he said he couldn't find anyone. This guy was just chasing him down the street, and then he finally found a woman to give the meat to. And so what Jack is saying here is that what Ginger did was a purely an altruistic act, in that he could have kept those pork ribs for himself, but he went out and he gave them to someone he didn't know at risk to his to his safety, his reputation, to his employment. And and even if the woman died hastily, is still is still I suppose an act of kindness, though maybe not with the intended result. And so so then at the end of this chapter, so because he's undercover and he's actually got plenty of means to support himself, he's only doing this undercover so that he can learn how the people of this part of London live. And so the rule is that if you skip out, you can't ever go back to that workplace again. And Jack London has absolutely no intention of going back to that workplace again. But but the problem is obviously his companions don't know that. And and then he says, he got out of there, he went back to his hotel room to his he changed his clothes, went into a bath, and he just wished that he could stand hotter temperatures in order to cleanse himself more of the germs that he may have picked up. So anyway, I don't know. I will finish the reading here. The next chapter is called Carrying the Banner. So that's chapter 10. That is Carrying the Banner. And when I read it. I don't know when that will be, but anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this. If you want to listen to the podcast, have a look at the banner down the bottom, the Twitter, the Facebook, the podcast, the website. Visit all of them at least twice. Until next time, stay safe, look after yourselves, be kind, all that kind of stuff. See ya.
I am sure of my